Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and though we may share a planet and many other similarities, our bodies function in some majorly different ways. In this video, we'll take a look at some of those differences unique to women.
Ovulation and the menstrual cycle. The processes of ovulation and menstruation occur because of the interplay between the pituitary gland, the ovaries, and the uterus.
This is the outside of the uterus, womb or baby bag where a baby develops. These are the ovaries where the eggs are stored and released from each month. These are the tubes that lead from the ovaries to the uterus. This is the cervix, which is the opening of the uterus. And this is the vagina. The hormones or chemical messengers that control the menstrual cycle are released from the brain and the ovaries.
Menarche, which refers to the onset of the first menstrual period, usually occurs during early adolescence as part of puberty. Following menarche, the menstrual cycle recurs on a monthly basis, pausing only during pregnancy until a person reaches menopause, when her ovarian function declines and she stops having menstrual periods. The monthly menstrual cycle can vary in duration from 20 to 35 days, with an average of 28 days. Each menstrual cycle begins on the first day of menstruation, and this is usually referred to as day 1 of the cycle. Ovulation, or the release of the oocyte from the ovary, usually occurs 14 days before the first day of menstruation. In other words, 14 days before the next cycle begins. So for an average 28-day menstrual cycle, this means that there are usually 14 days leading up to ovulation, in other words, the pre-ovulatory phase, and 14 days following ovulation, i.e. the post-ovulatory phase. During these two phases, the ovaries and the endometrium each undergo their own set of changes, which are separate but related. For the ovary, the 2 weeks leading up to ovulation is called the ovarian follicular phase, and this corresponds to the menstrual and proliferative phases of the endometrium. Similarly, the 2 weeks following ovulation is referred to as the ovarian luteal phase, which also corresponds to the secretory phase of the endometrium.
Women between the ages of 12 and 50 years old undergo a monthly cycle in which their uterus prepares for pregnancy. It prepares for a fertilized egg to settle and grow into a baby. If pregnancy does not occur, the lining breaks down and is expelled from the uterus. This is known as menstruation. The menstrual cycle usually lasts about 28 days. During this period, women undergo drastic hormonal fluctuations as well as physical discomforts, such as abdominal cramps, headaches, backaches, and general nausea. This has led to it being colloquially referred to as the curse. The first stage of the cycle is menstruation and occurs if the egg has not been fertilized. This lasts between 3 to 7 days and is more commonly known as a period. Because the egg has not been fertilized, the uterus lining, called the endometrium, is not needed, and hence it breaks down and is lost through the vaginal canal with some blood. The next stage is known as ovulation, and is when the woman is most fertile. After menstruation, the lining of the uterus thickens up again in preparation for a fertilized egg, and inside the ovary, a follicle develops. At about 14 days into the cycle, an egg is released from the follicle in the ovaries, and fertilization could take place. If the egg is fertilized and embeds itself in the thick uterine lining, the lining is not shed, and thus menstruation does not occur, and the woman becomes pregnant. If it doesn't manage to embed, then the lining will break down and menstruation will occur and the cycle is repeated. It is controlled by two main hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen is produced by the ovaries and causes the uterus lining, the endometrium, to thicken again after menstruation so that it is ready to receive an embryo. Progesterone is produced by the empty follicle in the ovary. See how it is produced after the egg has been released, and then drops off if the egg does not embed in the uterus, or if the egg is unfertilized. But if the egg is fertilized and embeds, then progesterone levels stay high for the first 6.5 months of pregnancy. The follicle continues to produce it, and a placenta is formed. So estrogen builds up the uterus lining, and progesterone maintains it during the second half of the menstrual cycle. There are two other hormones also involved: the follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, and the luteinizing hormone, or LH. Both FSH and LH are secreted by the pituitary gland. FSH causes the egg to mature in the ovary, and it also stimulates the ovaries to release estrogen. The estrogen then stops FSH being produced, so that only one egg matures in the cycle. LH causes the mature egg to be released from the ovary and stimulates the release of progesterone. You may want to browse the internet to learn more about these hormones.
At the start of a typical 28-day menstrual cycle, the hypothalamus secretes gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or GnRH, into the network of blood vessels which surrounds the pituitary gland. This stimulates the cells of the pituitary gland to secrete follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, which travels through the bloodstream to reach the ovaries, where it stimulates the development of ovarian follicles. Each of the developing follicles consists of an immature egg, a number of cells which secrete estrogen, and fluid. Most of these developing follicles degenerate by day 7, leaving only a single dominant follicle to grow, nourishing the developing egg inside it. FSH helps the egg to mature in preparation for its release during ovulation, while the estrogen secreted by the developing follicles helps in the regeneration of the endometrial lining of the uterus. Around day 12, it's a surge of estrogen into the bloodstream. Which reach the hypothalamus, resulting in the increased secretion of GnRH and stimulating the production of luteinizing hormone, or LH, by the pituitary gland. This flooding of LH into the bloodstream causes the follicle to bulge, acting as a trigger for the rupture of the follicle and ovulation around the middle of the cycle. Immediately after its release, the egg is picked up by suction into the fimbriated opening of the outer end of the fallopian tube. From here, it takes about 5 to 6 days to travel through the fallopian tube, where fertilization occurs, before the fertilized egg gets lodged in the wall of the uterine cavity. If fertilization of the egg fails to occur within 12 to 24 hours, the egg begins to disintegrate and is eliminated along with the shedding of the endometrial lining. After the follicle ruptures, it is converted into a structure known as the corpus luteum, which secretes the hormone progesterone. Progesterone creates important changes in the endometrial lining of the uterus, making it suitable for it to receive the fertilized egg. The secretion of progesterone is maintained for several days. But if the fertilization does not occur in this period, the corpus luteum withers, resulting in a fall in the levels of progesterone and estrogen and a shredding of the uterine lining, starting the menstrual cycle all over again.
The reproductive period of a human female starts from the age of about 12 to 14 and continues up to the age of about 45 to 50 years. During this period, certain rhythmic changes take place in the reproductive organs, the ovaries and the uterus, at intervals of every 24 to 35 days. This is followed by a discharge of blood through the vagina. This is called menstruation, and the cyclic changes are called the menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle is a complicated hormonal phenomenon. The menstrual cycle is a series of changes in the lining of the uterus, the endometrium of a non-pregnant female that prepares it to receive a fertilized egg. The duration of the menstrual cycle ranges from 24 to 35 days, with 28 days being assumed as an average. There are 4 phases which constitutes the menstrual cycle. They are the menstrual phase, the follicular phase, the ovulatory phase, and the luteal phase.
The uterus goes through a cyclical developmental pattern to be ready for implantation and support of an embryo. The uterine or menstrual cycle is under the control of ovarian hormones. The uterine cycle also has 3 phases: the menstrual phase, the proliferative phase, and the secretory phase.
Menstrual phase. Menstruation is a periodic discharge of 25 to 65 milliliters of blood and mucus caused due to certain reduction in hormonal level. It lasts 3 to 5 days. This phase is initiated by the degeneration of the corpus luteum, which stops secreting progesterone, the shedding of the uterine lining, and rupturing of the uterine blood vessels take place in the uterus.
By convention, the beginning of the menstrual cycle is considered to be the first day of the menstrual flow. Changes in the endometrium are triggered by changes in levels of ovarian hormones. Falling levels of progesterone cause the spiral arterioles within the uterine endometrial lining to constrict. As a result, the cells of the stratum functionalis die and slough off. After menses, the proliferative phase of the uterine cycle begins.
Follicular phase or pre-ovulatory phase. This follows menstruation. It ranges from 6 to 13 days in a 28-day cycle. This stage is controlled by estrogens secreted by the ovaries. The uterine lining increases in thickness, becomes more vascular, and glands become prominent. The ovarian follicle develops to its optimum.
After menses, the proliferative phase of the uterine cycle begins. In response to estrogens secreted by the maturing ovarian follicles, the cells of the stratum basalis proliferate, regenerating the stratum functionalis and repairing the endometrium.
Post-ovulatory phase or the luteal phase. The uterus thickens further and prepares to receive the fertilized egg. This is the period between ovulation and the onset of the next menses. This phase lasts for about 12 to 14 days. The uterus undergoes further thickening. If fertilization occurs, the corpus luteum continues to grow. If fertilization does not occur, the corpus luteum degenerates towards the end of the cycle.
After ovulation, progesterone and estrogens secreted by the corpus luteum in the ovary stimulate further development of the stratum functionalis. The endometrial glands grow and coil. The endometrium becomes even more vascular and continues to thicken slightly, and the endometrial glands begin to secrete glycogen. If fertilized, implantation of an embryo occurs and is nutritionally maintained by the endometrium. If fertilization does not occur, then the corpus luteum disintegrates. Levels of progesterone and estrogen drop, and in response, the stratum functionalis of the uterine wall sloughs off during menstruation.